It's a good morning to you all. Welcome to Asake Online. This is the Breakfast Club. My name is Zenzele Ndebele. In the last few weeks and a few days, we have talked about the issue of transitional justice, specifically looking at the issue of Gukuraundi, because we know it's still a thorny issue amongst many. We have talked to victims, we have talked to the people who were involved, we have talked to the academics. But one voice that is missing with the person who was very involved at that particular time is that of the then ZIPRA commander, Dumiso Dabengwa. So today we've decided to visit Dumiso Dabengwa at his offices to find out from him what he knows about that particular time. There are a few questions that we want to ask him. The issue of the arms catch, did they belong to ZIPRA or to ZAPU? We also want to find from Dr. Dabengwa, did ZAPU support dissidents? Because we know that the government have said the 5th Brigade was deployed because there were dissidents who were supported by ZAPU. So we want to find out from Dr. Dabengwa what were his views at that particular time? What did they do or did they not do? So let's find out from Dr. Dabengwa what he has to say about that situation and what happened during that era. Let's look at the issue of integration when Zimbabwe wins its independence, and there's supposed to be integration in ZAPU and ZANLA. What do you think went wrong when it comes to the issue of integration?
Yeah, well, you need to be aware of the fact that the integration didn't actually start there. Before we went to Lancaster, we had been discussing about bringing our two forces, ZIPRA and ZANLA, together. This was a condition towards the formation of the Patriotic Front. I went after Tongogara had gone. We were given the task of going around the camps in Zambia and in Tanzania to find out from the cadres in the camps, both the ZIPRA and ZANLA cadres in the camps, as to whether they would be prepared to have the two forces coming together and them falling under one command. And we were then, as the two commanders, tasked with going around these camps and asking. We went around, spent a day or so discussing with the cadres at the camps, held meetings, got their opinions, and had them noted. But in brief, in all the camps that we went, the cadres said, we have no problem in coming together as one force and having one commander, provided the political leadership will have done the same. First, the political leadership must get together, have one leader, then we have no problem. This is when we then got this reply, and we went back to the joint meetings of ZAPU and ZANLA, ZAPU and ZANO, and we gave this report of a unanimous, almost a unanimous recommendation by the cadres from the camps, that as far as they were concerned, their soldiers, they'll take the orders once the political side has decided. This is what led to the formation of the Patriotic Front. Because we had been telling the leaders at that time, there is no point you asking us to get together when you are different parties. So this is what led to the formation of the Patriotic Front. The Patriotic Front was not formed only as a condition of going to Lancaster, going to the Lancaster House to talk with one voice, but it was mainly because of the need for the political leadership to get together in order to facilitate the combatants also coming together under one command. So this is important. We then came back home as those different forces. We had already discussed this issue during Lancaster with Tongokara, because I led the ZIPRA delegation at Lancaster, and Tongokara led the Zandla delegation. And whilst Lancaster was going on, we were busy discussing what would happen if there was a political settlement. How would we bring our forces to work together? And that there would be, you couldn't have a country with three different forces: ZAPU, ZAPU's ZIPRA, and ZANU's Nansinga, and then Ian Smith's Rhodesian forces. We needed to come up with a formula. And we discussed this. We even went as far as coming out with recommendations of a new Zimbabwe army, and that it would comprise, would pick up the best volunteers from the three armies and pick 5,000 from each of the best people that were volunteered and who were also militarily capable, and we would bring these together, and the integration would actually involve those three coming together.
So now you come in 1980. What are they?
We come in 1980, and unfortunately, Tongokara is killed in that so-called accident.
Do you believe it was an accident?
I really don't want to believe it was an accident. I think it was deliberate. Tongokara had come out to support, because the issue of the leadership of the Patriotic Front was postponed. The whole structure of the Patriotic Front had been created, and what remained was to name the people, the individuals that would fit into the different posts. And when they tried to do it during the Lancaster House talks in the UK, some people like Inos Nkala were strongly opposed to it, and they said, no, it must be left. That decision will be taken at home. That, to some of us, was an indication that people were not honest and they were not genuine. Because once we got back home, they decided ZANU would fight its elections on its own as ZANU. They added Patriotic Front. And when Komo heard this at the last minute, he decided to tell Omsiga that, well, in that case, go and register as Patriotic Front, ZAPU, PF ZAPU. So that complicated already our integration process, and we saw it. But we were busy then with the ceasefire arrangements. And each time we tried to discuss this issue with Omchuru, Labozwinavashi and so on, they were dodgy. And when we tried to say to them, look, this is what we had decided on with Tongokara in London, can we follow that when the time comes to bring the armies? This was, of course, before the elections. They dodged the whole issue until after the elections and the results were known.
So do you think Tongogara was eliminated because he was for the integration of these two forces?
That was one, and secondly, because he had almost openly said it during the Lancaster discussions, that as far as he is concerned, Nkomo should be the leader of the Patriotic Front. And that Mugabe was, because Nkomo is a natural leader who has got the experience and who has got the focus, whereas as far as he was concerned, Mugabe was good only for administration. And that's the position he should occupy, probably as Secretary General of the Patriotic Front. Those were Tongo's views. And unfortunately, he said them out during informal discussions with other people at Lancaster. But he was direct enough, he said it to me. And he was very clear, he said, I'm not saying this because I want to please you, but that is how I look at the two men. And per my own observation, it would really be disaster to have Mugabe as leader of the Patriotic Front and as leader of that country. And this is how I feel about it. He was very adamant about that position. And he was very angry when people suggested that it should be decided, left to be decided at home. He said, no, we're here, the military representation is here, the political representatives are here, even from inside the country. Why can't we sit down and resolve this matter? So when you and me go back into the country to supervise the ceasefire arrangements, we're doing it under one command. It's Nkomo who is giving us orders of what we should do. That was Tongogara's position. But as I say, after his demise, we tried to talk to colleagues to follow the same trend.
So a lot of
it was not possible.
A lot of ZIPRA guys who were well trained were definitely left out of the integration.
Well, this is what happened when we then went into the integration exercise. First, it started with creating battalion formations. Let's get people who are going to form the first battalion. We first want the command structure, those who can be commanders of the first battalion. Let's integrate those. Then after that, we can bring in the rank and file. And each time this integration was being done, the commanders and all the people who occupied the top positions, top posts, or top ranks rather, of those battalions were ZIPRA. Understandably, ZIPRA had trained regular battalions and they were very familiar with what it means to be a battalion. Zandla had not done that, although they had people who had extensive military training. But what happened on the Zandla side is that most of the people, most of their commanders, were not brought into the camps. They were left in the countryside, particularly in the eastern districts, so that they could, as commissars, so that they could campaign for ZANU to win the elections. And they are the people who caused ZANU to have no-go areas, where no parties were allowed to come in.
So you are, just fast forwarding, you're mentioning a very interesting thing, that the use of the military in elections didn't start now. It has always been ZANU's method.
Absolutely, yes. That's what happened. So it started even then. They were the commissars, and they're the ones who did all the campaign, and threatening people, and some of them had been commanders. They were known to the people in those areas, and they obviously, people listened to them, and when they told them, look, we'll be watching you as you go into the polling station. You see, these are powerful machines, showing them the binoculars, and they will see through the tent and will know exactly who you have voted. If you don't vote for ZANU, you know what's going to happen to you. And people were still frightened from the experience that they had during the war. So that's what Zandla did. They used those. It became then difficult. When it came to the third, I think it was the third or the fourth battalion, the formation of the third or fourth battalion, then the British BMAT that were responsible for this training, I forgot to mention a point, that the Rhodesians were not brought in who would operate with them in that battalion. The Rhodesians said, we are already regular army and we know what we're doing. When these people come, we'll join with them at that stage. But of course, the Rhodesians were also telling a lie. They never meant to actually join the new national army that was going to be formed. So when it came to the third or the fourth battalion, they then decided, no, the British instructors who were responsible for the integration, and they were giving reports to Mugabe. Mugabe told them, and it was then decided, no, if number 4 battalion is commanded by ZIPRA, number 5 battalion must be commanded by ZANU or Zandla. So it was changing the battalions in that manner. You had then very experienced ZIPRA commanders who were now subjected to be commanded, but junior Zandla personnel who in most cases had had very little training. And obviously when it came to giving orders at the camps, they found it an insult in some cases to follow orders that would be coming in from some of these young people who hardly had the experience of how to command a detachment of the army. So a number of zebra commanders got frustrated to the extent, really, some of them, of deciding we're wasting our time here. After all, they had not been forced to join, they had volunteered, and they just disappeared into thin air. Most of them went to South Africa. They actually went to South Africa and they joined the ANC. And this is why its independence, the ANC army, Umkhonto weSizwe, had quite a number of zebra commanders who would join them. Amongst the so-called dissident elements, I would say really there were very few, if any, but I don't think there were any high-ranking zebra commanders. You would find some of the lower ranks who got frustrated and decided to leave. Those probably, a few of them even then, decided, we'll go back to the bush.
But were they supported by ZAPU or ZIPRA?
ZAPU did not know about them at all, and it had no hand, absolutely. These were young guys who decided we will not have anything of it, and some of them were dismissed in a very humiliating manner. Like, I forget this battalion, which was somewhere in the Manicaland area, where they were called by the Zanda commander, and they were told to fall in line. All those that are zebra fall into that line there. And once they'd got themselves into line, into orders, they were then told, you go and pack your things and go. And they were all dismissed, just like that. So there were guys, obviously, who were very angry with that sort of thing. They saw some of their colleagues being wrongly accused of something. And the next thing, they disappeared, they were killed. So they saw quite a lot of other things that they did not expect would happen to a disciplined army happen, and they decided to leave.
So linked to the issue of dissidents was the arms catch. Was ZIPRA responsible for those arms catch?
No. The idea of the arms catch, the big arms caches, came out as a result of the insinuation by CIO. In all the camps, even the Zandla camps, almost all the camps, when the guerrillas were told to surrender their weapons, there were small arms caches that were hidden by the guys within the areas where the camps were. So it was not only in the case of ZIPRA. And the CIO guys then took advantage of this. And they actually went to one of our camps without the ZIPRA commanders' knowledge, and spoke to the commanders, for instance, of they knew the biggest arms storage was in the Kwai River mine, because most of the arms that came after our guys were stored, were sent for storage, including the ammunition at the Kwai River camp, assembly camp. And they went to the commander there. And they said, Osoneni Moyo, and told Soneni Uti, you know, you guys are stupid. The amount of arms that Zandla has hidden away, you know what the idea is. Once everything has been sorted out, these guys are going to go for you. They've already dismissed a number of you from the camps, from the battalions that have been formed. And this time they are going to come for you with those arms. The CIO guy said, you're going to be running without any defense at all. Why don't you move some of your weaponry and hide it somewhere? And they knew that Zebra had bought properties, farms. They said, to be on the safe side, Kwai River mine is so far from where things are going to be happening. Why don't you move your weaponry to places which are almost in the middle of the country? So they suggested the farm that we had bought in the Midlands, Hampton Farm. And they suggested another farm which we had bought in the Kami area. And that's how those weapons were cached. We did not know about it. We didn't even know about it when we got to court after we'd been arrested and were appearing in court. All we could do is deny any knowledge of those weapons, and we're doing it from the bottom of our hearts, because it was true, we did not really know about it. Many stories came out during our trial. If you went through our trial, you will find that there are places where I'm alleged to have been dishing out weapons, somewhere in the Matabeleland South, with Nkomo being there. And there was once an allegation like that, and that photographs had been taken of me dishing out weapons to the guys there. Hence the dissidents were actually meaning that we had actually armed the dissidents. These guys had been left out from integration and we had been arming them. Whilst the integration exercise was going on, I and Kwama were busy arming these guys. Stories like, allegations like that came in. And when it came to the exhibits, when our defense asked for the exhibits, if there were any photographs that were taken, if there had any witnesses who had been there, nothing could come out. So they were actually speaking about two to three main weapon caches on the ZAPU farms. And we only got to know it in court, when the guys that had been given the task, because the commander of Kwai, Muswaneni, gave evidence against us. In the caching of arms, he said, I had visited Kwai camp, and whilst we're walking to some place, I actually gave him instructions to the fact that they should create weapons, arms caches. And it was true. And it made it difficult because it was him or me who was lying or telling the truth. And I had no other defense really, except to say Swanen is telling lies. But of course the court had the exhibits of the weapons that were there. Only at the last minute, towards the end of our trial, two of the young men who had been given the task of caching those weapons decided, when they saw this trial going on court, and they said, they volunteered and said, no, we want to give evidence. And they came to give evidence that it is him, Soneni, the commander, who actually had been instructing them on how to cache those weapons. And that's how we were found not guilty without any doubt.
There's been this theory that some of the arms cache were belonging to Umkhonto Sizwe. How true is that?
Yes, there was. This is what I call the third cache, which was somewhere in the Matopos, where Vela Pirada had been given instructions to conceal some of the arms for the ANC. And remember, we had ANC comrades who had stayed there during the integration exercise, and who were recommended when the demobilization exercise took place and they were supposed to surrender their arms, who surrendered their weapons, and they demobilized, and they went to stay into the allocated villages with the people there, waiting to be armed and waiting to be given instructions about their crossing into South Africa. And it was decided that there should be weapons which must be cached so that they would be armed with those weapons. That was the third cache of arms that had been done. Uvelapi was found guilty on caching those weapons. He agreed that, yes, there were those weapons, but did not connect the ANC. The Umkhonto were Sizwe in that, because at that time, South Africa's dispensation had not yet come through. And we did not want to jeopardize the ANC, the MK comrades who were in the country, who were operating clandestinely, because Mugabe would not allow them. ZANU government would have not allowed them to operate from Zimbabwe. So that was secret. And Vela gave his own version of why he had been involved in the caching of those weapons. That was the only arms cache which accounted for the ANC.
So was he convicted then? How long was he sentenced?
He got convicted. I think he was given 3 years or something like that.
So now, connecting these things with the Kukurawundi, how are they linked? All these, the disappearance of tourists and all these things, how do we end up with the 5th Brigade?
Well, you can see that the Rhodesian intelligence, the CIO, working with Mnangagwa, was creating some of these pseudo dissidents who were sent out to carry out some of the so-called atrocities and sabotage in certain areas of government equipment, like vehicles, bulldozers that were, for instance, I understand, destroyed. And this was being done in order to prove that they were dissidents. And a 5th Brigade was then created to deal with the so-called dissidents. You did not need a 5th Brigade. Brigade is 3,000 men. At the end of this exercise, how many men came out? There were less than 100 people who came out to surrender as people who had been dissidents. And even those people, amongst those people, I've personally spoken to people who have said to me, "Hi, mina, I cannot come back ngizojoyina izipra kumbe ZAPU, izipra Veterans Association kumbe ZAPU. Ngoba abantu labana, if I did that, that would be the end of me." Why? Why would they come? There was an amnesty. And you were given an amnesty, so why are you scared? He says, no, I won't tell you. But that would be the end of me if I ever was found to be supporting or to be a member of the ZIPRA Veterans Association or joining ZAPU. That would be the end of you. And my own conclusion is that because he is one of the people who was being used as a dissident, and he is a guy who committed most of the atrocities in the Matopos area. It had been planned, probably planned as early as at independence, if not before. By both ZANU and, I want to think, the British were involved right from the onset.
So do you think this was a genocide?
Yes, it was. There's no doubt about it. It was genocide.
You are in government at that particular time, or you've been arrested?
No, I was in prison.
Yeah, you were in prison at that time. And was there room to engage these guys to find out what is going on?
To find out?
Why they are doing what they were doing.
Who?
The ZANU guys.
The government?
Yes.
No, there was, for me, I was in prison. All they did is to come to see me, and after the case had been dismissed by the High Court, all they did was to come and visit us from time to time, and with all sorts of things. At one time they came after Masuku had passed on, and they came to say, if you join ZANU-PF, here is the card. By sunset today, you will be out of prison. And they said, over my dead body, never would I join ZANU-PF.
So Mnangagwa was heavily involved in this thing?
Yes, of course.
He is the man who is in charge now.
Oh.
And Emmerson Mnangagwa is the president.
He planned it all together with Mugabe. They were the two brains behind it. They planned it together. And this is why, even after the army coup, Mnangagwa will not do anything to hurt Mugabe. His only quarrel with Mugabe just now is that he sacked him from government. And Mugabe's quarrel with Amazon is that he allowed the army to put him in his place, because he knows he was not involved in the coup arrangements. But for him to agree to be placed in Mugabe's place, that's Mugabe's quarrel with him.
We know there have been attempts, like we have the Zimbabwe Commission, we now have all these National Peace and Reconciliation, and it's like starting afresh. Will we ever know the contents of the Zimbabwe Commission?
We will not know, but we know that from some of the people that were involved in producing that report, we know that their report, to a very large extent, absolved ZAPU completely of any wrongdoing. And they pointed out that this was a planned genocide, supposed to get rid not just of ZIPRA commanders and ZAPU officials, but cow down the whole Matabele nation, so that they can learn that any Ndebele who raises his head in the future will go the same way.
Could this be a reason why the government doesn't want to release the document?
That's the reason why they don't want to release the document. But we know, some of us know, exactly what the recommendations were.
So, yeah, when that, what were some of the, what do you think were some of the recommendations for that report? Yeah.
We know what some of those recommendations were. At the appropriate time, we'll spell it out.
I mean, lastly, what do you think should be done for the victims of Gukurahundi?
The victims of Gukurahundi first need to be identified properly, and once this has been done, I think government should be able to consider compensation for these victims. There is also the aspect of development around Matabele land. Most of the areas remained completely undeveloped to this date, and there should be a deliberate move to ensure that these areas are developed such that the communities in those areas should be able to benefit.
Do you think Mnangagwa is going to apologize for the Gukurahundi atrocities?
He's already refused. I don't ever think he would do it. that will be an indictment on himself. And if you should expect him to do it, I don't think so. That's why Mugabe refused to indict himself. So will Emerson.
Looking back, what would you have done differently?
Who?
As ZAPU, as ZIPRA?
ZAPU, there is nothing we would have done differently. We only regret the fact that we did not realize that at independence, the British had already made a decision with Mugabe to carry out this genocide, and had already decided to ensure that no one of Ndebele origin would be allowed to be leader in this country.
The British are currently involved in the electoral process, commenting on the voters' role and actively involved in trying to mend relationships. What's your comment on that relationship?
It's not the British, it's the UNDP that is involved. It's the UNDP. They are, of course, members of the United Nations. So indirectly, they've supported that.
But do you think the British currently support Emerson?
I think the British, yes. The current British ambassador, made it very clear, right in the early days of the appointment, when we're discussing about who best would succeed Mugabe from, she was asking me from my point of view, when Mnangagwa was still in government as vice president, and said, who do you think would be the best person to succeed of the ZANU leaders? Who do you see as the possible person? And I said, none. None. There's no one who would really be able to have the interests of the people of Zimbabwe at heart and be able to correct all the injustices that have happened in the past. I don't see any one of them. And her argument was, Mnangagwa has changed a great deal. I think if you were given the chance to lead this country, you would find that he would really do a lot to try and correct all the wrong things that have been done in this country. I told her, that's your opinion, and I don't blame you for holding that opinion, but in my view, I don't see anyone amongst the lot.
So do you think they will support him full time to make sure that he...
Absolutely, yes. In spite of all the sanctions and so on, they released 100 million recently. Supposed to be for some assistance on a humanitarian basis to assist the government on this and that, but they want to find a way of really coming out in full support. I think the British are, as far as they're concerned, what is more important in Zimbabwe is not the peace and stability of this country that we're looking for. For them, it is their interests in the resources of this country that they're interested in. and they will pursue that interest up to the end.
Wow, that was a very informative interview that we had with Dr. Dumiso Dabengwa. There are a lot of issues that have always been speculation and they've never been talked about. I think in this interview, it is clear that Dumiso Dabengwa is saying ZIPRA was not involved in the dissidents. They were not supporting them. He also mentions the issue of the arms catch. But what I find interesting actually is that he talks about the death of Tongogara, that we cannot separate the death of Tongogara from what happened after independence, because he was actually, according to Dumiso Dabengwa, he was eliminated by those in ZANU because he was more to agreeing with the people who wanted the united front between ZAPU and ZANU. But one thing that is also interesting, and that is a take home from this interview, is that Dumiso Dabengwa accepts or admits for the first time that there are people who have the contents or who know what are the contents of the Chihambakwe report. And he mentions that the Chihambakwe report absorbs ZAPU and ZIPRA from what happened at that particular time. And I think the challenge that we can have to the government is that can they release the document probably to see what was then, and if they argue against what Dumiso Dabengwa has just told us, to prove otherwise. But then also, lastly, maybe what is interesting is how Dumiso Dabengwa mentions the involvement of the British during Gukuraundi, how they were, or how he thinks that they were involved, and probably currently that he thinks that they are supporting Emmerson Mnangagwa like they've always done. So I think this was a very informative interview that will be a discussion point for many days to come. My name is Zenzele Ndebele. Till we meet again tomorrow, have a good day.